We'll work on the. There we go. Okay, I think we have a pretty good group here. It's a minute after the beginning of the meeting, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody knows a few folks here on the screen. My name is Eddie Montes. I'm the Solutions Manager for Supply Chain and the co-lead for the P2P workstream for the Aggie Enterprise project. We have a few different folks here from the supply chain team, our training team. Mike Morgan, our Director of Procurement, who's going to help me out with some of the procurement specific questions about the process that we'll go through today. And then we have a presentation that we'll provide to you, have a little PowerPoint that I want to go through, kind of providing some information on the future state, again, NPA process, as you know it by today in Kuali. And then I will go into Aggie Enterprise and do just a quick demo of essentially what I explained on the slides, just to get an understanding of what this looks like future state. So let me start sharing my screen so we can get going. All right, you should see the PowerPoint here on the screen. And before we get started, so again, I'll go through PowerPoint first. I think it's about 5 slides or so, something fairly quick. If there's any questions that come up while I'm going through the slides, feel free to throw them in chat, or even go off mute if you like. This is kind of a smaller crowd, it's somewhat informal of a demonstration. So feel free to ask questions as they come up. I will try to stop after a couple slides maybe, and also before we switch over to Oracle to see if there's any more questions. And then again, through the demo in Oracle, and then after we can stop as well and take any questions that you may have, whether it's kind of process-wise into what we're doing, or again, any other questions that might come up while we're talking about this stuff. Okay, I guess I'll open it up. Any questions before we even get started here? Hopefully everybody knows why you're here.
Eddie, it'd be interesting to know what NPAs are typically used for by all the units. I don't know what units are represented here. I mean, I see a lot of A&R folks, which is where I'm from. I don't know what other units have NPA permissions.
I think we do kind of look at NPAs like if you have to ask, you shouldn't have it.
We use it very, very, very sparingly, and so
it's not. Yeah, I actually no. I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but it isn't. We would not endorse collaborating and sort of cross sharing as to use cases. Everybody has a very unique use case that they're delegated permission to purchase for, and you would not have the right to go purchase the same thing someone else is doing. So our DCM group is building buildings, and our capital finance group is arranging giant leases. There wouldn't be crossover in those use cases. I hope.
Well, I'm hoping you look at the data so you would know.
Okay. So, I mean, that was kind of going to be my start, honestly, in terms of the NPA and KFS today. And my joke was going to be, hopefully you all know why you're here, because hopefully you are processing NPAs. Otherwise, you're in the wrong room. So, again, the current state, and again, the reason why you're here is I did an exercise of looking at all the individuals in Kuali who have the NPA user role. And then we send you guys that communication and ask you to be here. So again, the assumption would be that you will be interested in knowing what the future state looks like. Again, you hopefully will know what the NPAs are today. And like Mike said, everybody has different uses that they leverage this for in Kuali today. I did miss a couple folks, and it was really just a couple in my original communication as I was kind of doing the research of these people on the user roles. I did catch them later, so everyone should be here or should have been invited. But if it seems like somebody's missing, or someone that process NPAs is not here or did not receive the communication, please feel free to forward to them the recording we'll have available after, and then also the slides that I will be sending out after the meeting as well, just to make sure that everybody knows about the new process that we're going to be rolling out. Okay, so again, just with the assumption that everyone knows about NPAs and Kuali today, just wanted to move right away and go into looking at the future state. So delegated purchasing. right? So the NPA, I believe, is a document within Kuali. So moving forward, the way that we're gonna process these is make available a couple smart forms on the procurement area to create requisitions. So with that in mind, we're just calling those forms delegated purchasing forms. You'll see them in the demo that I'll do in a minute in Aggie Enterprise, but just in terms of terminology, right? NPA is really just a document within Kuali. This Kuali is gonna go away. We're just gonna be calling this delegated purchasing. And in our plan, right, again, I talked about doing the analysis on who has the KFS user role. Our goal essentially will be to take all of the folks with that user role and then provision access to them as we go live into Aggie Enterprise with, again, 2 smart forms within the requisition area. And these 2 smart forms will allow you to then create requisitions that will somewhat be equivalent of the NPA document today in Kuali. All right, so a little bit about this new delegated purchasing forms, right? These are restricted. Again, we have control over that. Procurement does have control over who has access to those. And then they will have a predefined list of purchasing categories, formerly known as commodity codes. So I'll probably repeat myself quite a few times here, but if you are or have been part of the SEM testing during SUAT or even before, you'll kind of start getting used to some of the new terminology. So again, old terminology, commodity codes, new terminology, purchasing categories in Aggie Enterprise. One of the things that I believe will be different from the current state on the NPAs in Kuali is that this document, you're really just creating a requisition, a non-catalog requisition, just like other folks would do. But because you have a predefined list of categories, the requisition is going to work a little bit differently. What's not going to work differently than others, though, is you are still going to need an approval being done. I guess what you would equate to your fiscal approver today, your fiscal officer approving that requisition today in Kuali, that will need to happen in Aggie Enterprise. So either your PPM project manager, if you use a PPM project, or your chart of accounts approver will still have to approve that requisition for you to move on to the next step. And there are a couple categories, and we'll go through them, that do require our capital asset accounting team to also approve those requisitions. Now, that being said, after those approvals have been secured, as you can see on bullet 4, this requisition will not route to procurement and contracting services. Just like today, after all those approvals are taking place in the requisition, then the purchase order will be issued and will go out the door without a procurement having to touch that. So I'll stop there for a minute. Any questions on any of these points here?
So if the initiator is the PPM project manager, will it route the delegate? That
is a good question. If you are the PPM project manager and you are submitting a requisition, you actually are not allowed to do that. The system will actually reject that requisition because separation of duties, right? You should not be able to create your own requisition and then approve it. So when you use PPM, it's a little bit tricky because there's only one project manager assigned to that PPM project. Therefore, the best we could do was just set up a rule in the system that just rejects the requisition upon submission. So it'll just be one of those things that we'll put out on our website to make sure it's clear, but that is the control that we have put in place. And
okay,
I think
you.
there's a question on chat. Oh, I think that's the same thing. Okay. All right, so why don't we look very quickly at the purchasing categories? So we have 17 different purchasing categories here that will be available in this form. Again, the old commodity codes. So a number of them, so just 3 of them, will also route to capital asset accounting for approval. So they will need to review those as well. A couple of them only if they're over the asset threshold of $5,000, although in Oracle is going to be $4,670 to be exact, but I just put kind of the 5K note here. So again, your requisition after your fiscal approval or PPM project manager approval will also route to asset accounting for these 3 categories here if you were to use them. And then I would almost break out these categories into 2 sections. The top 2 are two that we somewhat brought from Kuali, type of a commodity code mapping that we did. So hopefully these two might look a little familiar. And both of these, and then we might change the name to make sure that this is clear. But our thoughts here would be that the top two will not be used with PPM capital projects. And you can see why the other 15 call out PPM capital projects here. And I'll have Courtney Finn here, who's joining us, kind of explain a little bit more on that concept. And again, we'll probably change the name to make this clear for users, but the top two are not to be used with PPM capital projects. So Courtney, maybe you can help me out here in this topic, because I know you help us create this 15th here, and there may be some specific uses, and you maybe can provide that context as to why we went about adding this ones here.
Sure. So I'll start with the bottom 15 that I'll start with cap 00. So those are the ones that we use today in the plant chart of accounts. So chart P and M and N, and they have the unique object codes that are like 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are only to be used on the capital projects, and in Kuali, those are in the P, M, and N charts, and then in Oracle, they'll be in the PPM capital projects. So hopefully those sound familiar, and if you use them today, hopefully that should make sense, and it's pretty much exactly the same as it's set up today. The top two, so the first one, real estate lease and rental, that's essentially equivalent to today's 5121 object code. So that is used pretty much only by our real estate services group when they're setting up the real estate leases. And then the building and facility construction and capital, that's DCM's code for the non-capital project purchases. So those are the projects DCM's doing today that's in the chart 3. So that would be like your object code 9700. Does that make any questions, or hopefully that makes sense to the people that use these today?
So Courtney, how about if like for the expenses for the 7151, and which is like not non-capital, but it's on our requisition?
The 7151.
And then 7101, and like under requisition, therefore capital, I mean that basically projects, And also, I'm not sure why it has to be, sorry, it's not that I'm being like, don't want you to approve it or not, but the thing is like we use NPA, for the purchase, I mean, basically contract, like construction contract, consultant contract that has been like approved, right? Like signed, the agreement already done. So we basically just enter in the system. Do you also have to approve them? Because there are a lot, the consultant.
The only one that's routing for approval is the equipment one, and that's because our equipment team has to get that ready to tag that movable equipment. The other one, the 72000C, that one we have set up to route for approval, but I think we're going to see how that goes and see if that makes sense or if that needs to be adjusted. The rest of them are will not route for capital asset approval, because I agree with you. Those are already set up on those approved projects.
Okay, so I just need clarification on the category code for which one that we are going to use for acquisition.
Okay, and let me make sure I understand the question. So these are today you're using
like for study, so
these are going to chart 3.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the object code that's being used today?
We use 7215, 70, 7151, 7150, 7101, and like sometimes like 9701, but we might be able to like go to capital project if it's decided, but we might switch it back, you know. But we still use 9702, I'm sorry, 9702 once in a while.
Let me get back to you on that, but I think that those would all fall under that 7.2 category.
Okay, cool, thank you.
But let me confirm that.
And Tracy, I'll go to you real quick, but I did wanted to compliment Ariante. Just want to make sure that we're clear. Like Courtney says, right? Only these three would route to the asset team. You will still, like I said earlier, you will still need that fiscal officer manager approval. Fortunately, there's no way around it in Oracle. So even those, they do need that step of someone approving them, and that's just kind of how the system is designed to work.
That's totally fine. Yeah, we can do. Yeah.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Tracy.
So for real estate lease and rental over a year, any unit can use that or just real estate services?
Right now it's set up just for real estate services since it's,
So what will A&R use? Because we have lots of rental that's over a year and rental that's under a year.
right, don't we have a, let me look at I gotta consult my notes. If we set up a separate one for that.
All right, I'm gonna open my sheets on the side here too.
Got my cheat sheet here too. I just have to find it mixed in with all the other ones. Are you guys, real estate services isn't using the under a year, correct? You're just doing the leases that are a year or more?
No, I think we have leases like only a couple of months. For example, Noel, I think Noel is in the call too. We have like for example, like department just use like building for summer session. We use that one too.
Right, I think we have
Most of ours are more than a year, but yes, we use both.
Yeah, we have other there. These are just the category codes that are set up on the let me use the right terminology, the delegated purchasing. So there are other category codes that are set up for leases. This
Right.
one is just very specific for those real estate leases that are over a year that our real estate services group are responsible for negotiating.
Okay, so there's going to be a separate list of ones that like A&R would use.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
We
So,
have it mapped out. I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay, that's okay. Great. Thank you.
so just real quick on that though, just want to make sure we align on this, and this is good. This is kind of a working meeting in a way, I guess. The real estate lease and rental 1 year or less category exists outside of this process. It sits in the standard non-catalog requisition forms that you would use. And here, Mike, Morgan, maybe hopefully that's making sense, right? So that's not part of these NPA/delegated purchasing process. We do have a 1 year or less real estate lease and rental that is part of normal purchasing non-catalog requisition. So that lives outside of this.
Yeah, that's correct. And procurement processes those for things like storage units, trailer rentals, et cetera. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, great.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, and I just found it, and yep, we have it. We've got the code set up for that
Okay.
outside of this.
But then, and so then again, I want to kind of clarify to Tracy's question, because so Tracy, you're saying there are real estate lease and rentals over 1 year that A&R uses.
Correct. So our legal team negotiates rentals for property that we do on NPAs. And most of the time they're over a year, sometimes they're under a year. And so we had our own list of commodity codes that I shared with you for NPAs.
All right. So in that case, and I mean, obviously here, the folks with the procurement background, correct me if I'm wrong, but then they would use this category. Or there may be a need to break this out in a different manner within this delegated purchasing forms. So A&R will also use this category for those requisitions that they're creating.
I think I want to make sure I have the use case
Okay.
correct. Let me ask one more question. So Tracy, are you inputting the real estate services agreements for A&R that are over a year, or they're doing those themselves?
So our legal team negotiates the lease and then they're sent to my team to be inputted in as an NPA so we can initiate the payment documents.
Okay, and then you would use this category code.
Yes.
And that would apply regardless of A&R versus campus. The same category code would be used. It sounds like potentially you're using other codes. And Eddie, maybe we can take a look at what those are today and if there is a need to add additional ones. But I think in that situation, you can also use the other category codes, correct?
Right. I mean,
Yes.
my thought would be that you could use this category. I guess I'm just trying to make sure that there's no conflicts based on what we're saying here, right? Because we are changing, the model, right? I think today there's very specific commodity codes that exist, even based on units. That goes away in future state because that's what the chart of accounts really is doing in a way, right? And what your PPM project is doing. So this is the nature of your purchase, but really then the project is what drives, who it belongs to. Like I don't think that we need to create a A&R real estate lease and rentals over 1 year, central campus real estate lease and rentals. So I think then the answer is like this will be the one that you would use, Tracy, and then your PPM project will essentially signal that that is a A&R purchase.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, Courtney, what might make sense is maybe you and I can get together and then do a mapping of these categories to current state. I think that will be kind of help illustrate the users as to what they had before, what they equate to in future state, to kind of make that crosswalk and then make that a little bit better on them for the transition.
Yes, agree. And I've got it mapped to object code, but I can try and layer in the commodity code today as well, and maybe that would help as well.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and then one thing, I do have on my notes here to remind everyone after this slide is, one of the goals for this demo as well is to get some feedback in terms of like, are we missing something? Right? Are there any categories that you guys are using that we need to take into account? So we would want to get that feedback. Again, I'll send these slides out after the meeting. So maybe we can get the feedback from you all, and then we can evaluate to determine whether that is something that needs to be added. So no promises that we will absolutely add it, but we definitely want to get that feedback from you all to make sure we're not missing something here. Okay. Anything else on this one? Okay. And the last slide here, again, maybe kind of deviating a little bit from what we were just talking about, but very important to note. December 14th is the last day for NPAs in Kuali to get created. At the end of the day, that NPA user will be inactivated, and then you will no longer be able to create NPAs at the end of this year. This is all right based on our deadlines that we have to convert things over to Aggie Enterprise. So we need to convert all of our purchase orders. So at some point we need to put a stop to the processing. I know, Crystal, I believe you might have sent this already. I know we're trying to communicate some of those dates, some of those official dates out to campus. We have the information on our website, so definitely encourage everyone to visit that as well.
Yeah, that was sent out yesterday's email, and then I've got it up on the chat there if you guys want to go take a look.
Yeah, we wanted to get those dates out to everyone as soon as we could. And then obviously in the coming months, we'll also be sharing some information on how to, maybe purchase goods or services if a critical need were to arise in between the time with some of the procurement documents are inactivated and, the end of the year. So our hope is that that will be a small volume of orders maybe that would need to be critical, but we're working to what that process looks like, and we'll definitely communicate that to everyone as soon as we have that info. But for now, the dates are out there. Please take a look. Please share widely to make sure that as many folks know about this, so there's no surprises coming. Again, come December or whatnot. Okay, that's the end of the slides here. So why don't I go ahead and do a demo? Okay, so again, I mentioned this a few times. If you've completed testing for the supply chain work stream, hopefully a lot of this is you've seen before. Hopefully you're somewhat familiar with some of the screens that you'll be seeing here. And then essentially just how to create a requisition, because that's essentially what you're doing here. Just really creating a requisition, but you have a form that will only be visible to you. And that form specifically only have a number of categories, and then that drives a little bit of workflow as well. Okay, so again, for those that maybe are not familiar with the screens as much, I'm just in the purchase and requisition screen, which is where we're going to have, our catalog purchasing or our store catalogs that we have for our stores on campus. And then we also have this area here for this request forms, and this is what I was talking about when it comes to the delegated purchasing forms. I do have additional access, or more access than maybe the common folks. So don't be surprised if when you jump into here, things look a little bit differently. Forms 1 through 8, everyone should be able to see. Those should just be available for all folks that create requisitions. And then you can see maybe a little bit behind the curtain, there's also a restricted form for CGA use only for sub awards. So likely you will not be getting that one, but you will get these 2 forms, as I had mentioned in the presentation, right? The delegated purchasing use only fixed price, so a non-quantity form. And delegated purchasing use only quantity based. So if you're creating a quantity line or a non-quantity line, this is how you would do it. And one thing to clarify, to kind of get some of the understanding here, the forms are assist you in creating lines of a requisition. They're not the requisition per se. So once I create one, hopefully you'll see what I mean. We go ahead and go into this fixed price based form, and you'll go into this little area, and then you have the items with the asterisk, so the mandatory ones that you'll have to fill out. So in this case, let's say I'm just doing a construction, spell that right, construction contract, let's say, and then, obviously we'll want more details on that, but we'll just, for the purposes of the demo, we'll just add that in there. You can see the category name. This is the purchasing category that you'll be selecting. So in this case, I'm just going to hit search because there's not that many, and you can actually see all 17 of them that I had shown in the slides are listed here. Let me find one that's good here. Why don't I do, oh, perfect. We'll just do construction. So I'll select construction, and let's say you're just creating one for 15 mil. I'll just put the amount in there, and then you go in here and you add your supplier. So I would expect that you would know what the supplier is. I've been playing around with this hard manufacturing company just so we can have one in there. And then the supplier site. So supplier site is the equivalent of your address in Kuali today. I could go into the search function here. I'm just for demo purposes, I'm gonna delete it. I don't know what address I'm going to use. I can just hit search, and it'll give me, oh, well, in this case, this supplier only has one address. That's why it defaulted. But you can see the address of that supplier here. There's other ways of looking at the address. Again, not focusing too much in some of the ways to search and kind of look stuff up. That will really all be covered in our SCM training guides that will be available very soon, will be available for UAT. I think really the focus of this group is the forms, the categories that you have, and some very high level information on the requisition. So again, at this point, I'm just going to go back and just select the address here. So basic information listed, supplier and the address / site. I'm going to add that line to my cart, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to my cart here, review it. Now that was the form. This is the requisition. So the form allows you to add this line to a requisition. If you actually had multiple lines, you would actually use the same form or a different form and keep adding lines to the requisition, and if you want multiple. But I believe most NPAs today really just have more than one line.
Hey, Eddie, quick question.
Sure.
Does when you select between the quantity based and the fixed, what was it?
The fixed price.
Do those function differently? What's
They
the-
they don't really. I could let me see. Just want to make sure I don't. Let me save and close.
Really, the difference is on the line. So instead of having just that price, you're gonna have
Yeah.
quantities. So 15 of each, or lots, or boxes, or that's really the only difference.
Okay,
So yeah, quantity, see quantity and unit of measurement are on this line.
okay.
And-
And all of the purchase, or I'm sorry, we'll get used to the new terms. All the category codes are the same for both of the delegated purchasing.
Yep. And so when you look at the categories, and Jim, this goes to your question, you can't select a category that is not or a restricted document because the form only has this 15. So the form itself restricts the number of categories that you want to use. So I guess, you know, the thought is you want to make sure you're using the right form. If you're using, and I'll just play around with this a little bit, you're actually using the standard fixed price form. When you go into your categories, you search, you actually have hundreds of them. Not exactly like 200, not that many, but a lot more. The form itself restricts the categories that you can use. And that form is what drives the workflow with not having to route to procurement. So again, the form really itself is the important thing to make sure to understand here. Okay, so I'm just gonna go back again. I just kind of stepped out of the what I was building, but let me just go back to the requisition for you all to see how I created this. I'm gonna go back into edit mode. And then I'm just looking at, again, a requisition here. You know, the construction contract note that I had put is really coming at the line level. You always want to go back and update your description and business purpose, right? What is this for? Maybe this is construction, you know, on building XYZ, scheduled for, you know, whatever dates. And, you know, there's a number of items, you know, a number of description, you know, sentences maybe that you want to add into this field. Most of the other kind of DFFs that we created, additional fields that were in there, won't really apply, I think, to what you currently do today. What you probably want to know about is attachments, right? You can attach things here at the header level of the requisition. I will select my trusty soccer ball picture that I use for every single attachment that I do for my testing, you know, as a, you know, a contract attached, something like that, maybe as a description. You can, you know, you have the category, you want to keep that internal to the requisition, you want to be sending that to the supplier, you want to be putting that on the approver, whatever, wherever you want that attachment to end. And again, all the information on the specific options here will be available on our website for you to kind of navigate. But I'm just going to go ahead and add this, again, attachment here. You can add multiple attachments if you like. Obviously, if you want to do more, you just need to hit the plus button. Then I'm looking at the line again. You enter the 15 million line. And then when you're seeing here at the bottom is really your kind of delivery location. Most of these will likely be services, so nothing necessarily to be delivered or good to be delivered. But then you have your billing information, so your chart of accounts information, right? I have this chart of accounts set up as my default. That's why it automatically populates. You can see that that's the one line. So the percentage is 100. You have the $15 million here. I didn't want to show, and hopefully this will work. How do you add a project number here? And I have a project here on the side that I'm going to add. I'm going to add it there, and I'm going to tab over. So again, I would expect that a lot of times you're really working with PPM projects. So when you add the project number, this is your POET area. And again, hopefully that means something to most folks here, not necessarily someone who can train on the PPM side, but again, hopefully something that folks understand a bit of. If not, please make sure you are, you know, checking in with the PPM workstream and the folks that are representing you there for testing to make sure that you kind of understand what's going on. But from a procurement perspective, if you have a POET that you're using, enter the project here, you tab over, and that opens up a number of other fields here, right? Your task number. Depending on the project that you're doing, there could be different tasks that you're selecting. So go ahead and select this one. Again, this is just a random project that I know works, so that's why I selected it. Your expenditure type is essentially the nature of the purchase, right? Similar to your natural account in the chart of accounts. This is defaulted. This defaults based on mapping of our purchasing category. So this is all mapping that has been done behind the scenes. That is not something that you can change. And then the expenditure organization is essentially the organization incurring the cost. I always have some issues kind of explaining this from the PPM side, exactly what it does, because it doesn't really drive anything. The mapping of POET to chart of accounts is all done in the PPM module. So again, if you want additional information on each of these segments, I would definitely refer back to some of the PPM training information that is out there. I'm just going to select a random department here just to make sure we have that in there. And I'm just going to hit save real quick so you can see how the chart of accounts here has updated, because the project and some of these other fields that you have selected on the POET area update your chart of accounts. So if you see my fields here, right, there's a specific fund associated with that project. There's a specific department associated with the project, and now you can see the project is listed here as well in the chart string. Again, all of this is updated based on rules that have been set up out in the PPM module. All right, and then I'm just you have the ability, if you like, to add some notes to the supplier at the line level, and attachments also at the line level. So if you had multiple lines, you could maybe use this area to differentiate some of the notes and attachments. But again, for the most part, I believe you guys just use one line, and then you can do the attachment at the header level. And then I'm just going to submit. And I believe I am the fiscal office, or sorry, a PPM project manager for this project. So you'll see how that requisition is going to reject, because I shouldn't be creating one and approving it myself. This is a little warning. This is kind of a soft warning you get. Essentially, the project likely doesn't have enough funds to cover this requisition, but it's a soft warning. This will be something that the project manager will have to take into account when they're approving the requisition. Again, just to kind of pass it for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to hit yes, and the requisition will be submitted. And again, in a minute, once kind of Aggie Enterprise as it's saying, this pending approval status will change to reject. As you can see, I was testing yesterday because that is my own PPM project. So that was a bit, especially if you have not tested so far in Oracle yet. But do we have any questions?
I have some questions.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm currently responsible for all the MPAs for school of medicine and school of nursing. And we always use the same commodity code, which is the PS, I think, PS 000001 professional services. Any of our real estate ones are created by real estate services. And I do all these mostly consulting services, drug manufacturers, all that kind of stuff. But so these codes are going to take the place of the current commodity code that I'm using, you're saying, right? This list?
That's correct.
Okay. And then what was my other question? So currently, you know, we have to have a signed agreement from health system contracts. And I've been told that that's obviously been ending. I haven't asked for, you know, now from going forward, I've been telling people not to go to health systems contracts, that they need to submit it as a regular requisition in Kuali, and we're no longer doing MPAs. But now you're saying we are doing MPAs for these types of things, but they don't have to. Where does the contracts come from now, since we're not sending them through health system contracts?
Mike, you want to help me out with that?
Are you saying that you're referencing health system contracts and attaching them to the current MPAs?
Currently, the way we've been doing MPAs for school of medicine and school of nursing is they have to go through health system contracts to get a contract in place. It was used to be signed by Annie Wong. Then when she left, it was then signed by Eric Jenkins. And that is the only way I was able to put an MPA in place, was if it was signed through health system contracts. Since then, obviously, we have changed that, since we were told with the new implementation of Aggie Enterprise, we are no longer doing MPAs. But
Well, so I think you're getting stuck on the terminology. These can you go back to the forms?
Yep.
So on the form page, the restricted forms
Mhm.
is the new NPA.
Right.
That it's going to function the same way. So any of the contracts, whatever your process is going through to get a contract number through contracts and at the health center, that should still happen. You're just not using an MPA document. You're using a delegated purchasing document, which is the new NPA. And then you can attach it, any of the information that you would have attached to an MPA to this document. And it just won't route to procurement. So your process should be the same. If you have a requirement that you have to go through health contracting, then you should still continue to do that. Once you gather everything, you bring it back over to Aggie Enterprise and you go through this delegated purchasing form, and that's your new NPA.
Okay. I guess I will get with health systems contracts and see what their plan is for moving forward on all that. But okay, and then currently all the MPAs that I have in Kuali, you're obviously are no longer going to be accessible. You said as of December 14th. Will those all be transferred over into Aggie Enterprise then for us to access?
The 14th is the cutoff. You will not be able to enter any new ones.
Right. Okay.
So all of your existing that are still in effect and being used will get transferred, will migrate from KFS to Oracle.
Okay, so there'll be a time frame between December 14th and January 1st where I will no longer be allowed to input any MPAs during that period of time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's when they're physically going to be taking everything from one system and putting it into the new system.
Okay.
So plan ahead.
Okay.
Thanks, Barbie.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question. Sorry if I missed this in a previous meeting, but is there a way to copy requisitions so you can
Yeah.
kind of do copy? Okay. Would you be able to
Absolutely.
see that? Thanks.
Yeah. Just real quick. So I'm going, as you can see, reject it. So it doesn't tell me, there's no way you can find a reason for it, unfortunately. So we'll put on our website the different reasons why some things might reject out. But yeah, if you just go to actions, so you have to go to a requisition that you entered, and then you just go to actions and duplicate. Pretty easy. So you don't have to start from scratch. But you kind of go back to what you had entered before, and you know, if you want to change the chart of accounts, get the project out, for example, you should be able to kind of make some changes off of that.
So you can only duplicate one that you entered previously, not someone else?
That's correct. You could reassign a requisition that someone else did to yourself and then duplicate it, but you are taking that requisition out of that someone. So that is how it would work.
Yeah,
That is a great question though, because we do a lot of requisitions in which we search by, say, a vendor to see how it was done in the past. If we're asked to do some, because we do hundreds of requisitions a month. So someone might send us a request for something and we want to see how it was done in the past, what commodity code they used in the past. What is the searching mechanism in the new system for any of that, as far as, I guess you're saying we can't copy somebody else's requisition, but maybe we can at least look at another requisition by vendor or whatnot, right?
Yeah, right here. So requisition area, manage requisitions. And then you have a number of fields here that you can search by. Just kind of going fast a little bit, right? You can hit, there are different save searches that you could use. You can save your own, you can customize it. You can hit advanced, that opens up an add fields area where you can add additional fields to search by. For example, let's say I'm looking for everything that Mark processed, so I can search for his name, and then I hit search, and it will give me all of the requisitions that Mark created here at the bottom, so I can maybe take a look.
Okay, and then you can put in a supplier, maybe see how somebody did it for a specific supplier in the past.
Yeah, let me see if there's a supplier. Yep, supplier right here.
Okay.
So yeah, so you should be, there's a number of different ways of kind of playing with the searches, and that's one thing that is kind of hard to pinpoint for everyone. We'll try to provide some basic guidance on this, but ultimately everyone's going to find different uses to it. So we almost will depend on you guys to come up with some really awesome creative ways of leveraging these searches. But I think that there's quite a bit here to kind of play around with.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, cool. Well, again, we'll make the recording available on our website. We may be able to send it out on email as well. Work with Crystal on that. I will send out the PowerPoint as well for everyone to have this list out there. Corey and I can work together on some mapping for our new categories to make sure we can provide some guidance on that. And again, please do provide some feedback if if there's anything that seems to be missing, if there's any other questions that might come up, if you're kind of thinking to this a little more later, we're happy to answer them. The transition is somewhat seamless, to be honest. Once you maybe been in the system a little bit, it's really one document to the other. You have the NPA document in Kuali, now you have a forms. And that form is really what dictates the routing. So you have to use that form so it doesn't stop at procurement. Again, after a few uses, after a few times of testing, it should be, I think, pretty seamless for the uses of it. But obviously, you want to make sure you get in there. I know UAT is coming September and October, so please, if you haven't signed up, or if you haven't heard of when you might be able to come into the testing, please do so. I know there's a lot of different representatives around the different units who are organizing all of that. You want to make sure you're involved so you can get your hands on the system. If you haven't yet, hopefully some of you have already. But if you haven't, again, UAT is coming in the next month or so. It'll be super valuable for all of you to get in there early and again, continue to provide us some feedback. The design is pretty much set at this point. The design for Aggie Enterprise is what we have put out there. We believe it will work for most things. So we just want to make sure people get in there and kind of start getting used to it. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. And again, if anything comes up, shoot us a question. We'll go from there.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.